I'm Deb Markowitz, the new state director for the Massachusetts chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar about rare sandplain grasslands on Martha's Vineyard. But before we begin, I want to take a moment to address the terrible and heartbreaking racist incidents last week and this week's protests in Massachusetts and around the country. I'm reminded that even as we're all coping with the impacts of COVID-19, systemic racism continues to make it dangerous to be Black in this country. TNC is an organization deeply committed to the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that we cannot achieve our goals of a healthy planet without equal justice, dignity, and opportunity for people of color. TNC's new CEO, Jen Morris, did a great job expressing why it's important for TNC to speak up and why this issue is one that conservation organizations cannot ignore. If you haven't already, I urge you to read it. We've included a link to her message in the chat box. Like Jen, I'm committed to keeping equity top of mind in our workplace culture and our conservation outcomes. At TNC, we're going to continue to condemn racism and use our voice against racist violence. We know that statements are important, but we also know that it's not enough. Confronting inequalities stemming from racism is essential both in Massachusetts and across the country. As we collectively reflect on the most recent instances of racial hatred and violence, we should keep in mind the history that led us here. After decades of racist policies, Black and brown communities are the most likely to be living on the front lines of climate impacts. Communities of color are disproportionately impacted by water pollution and air pollution and toxic chemicals. They have the least access to nature, which we know now more than ever significantly impacts our physical well-being, our mental health, and resilience going forward. As people with privilege and as environmentalists, we have a duty to act. We must stop racism, discrimination, and violence because if they persist, our vision for a better world cannot be realized. We must also lift up voices of people who are in communities that are marginalized and historically underserved. None of this is easy, but working together, we can make a lasting change in our community and in the world. Thank you. And now I'll pass it over to our host, James Miller.
Thank you very much, Deb, for those powerful words. And thanks to everyone who's joined us here for Nature Connects, the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts ongoing webinar series that's meant to provide an opportunity for you to engage with TNC experts and partners locally and around the world. I'm James Miller, I'm your host. Whether for its connection to the historic 19th century whaling boom, or as a place of respite for presidents, or even as the place where the film Jaws was made, Martha's Vineyard tends to occupy a greater place in American lore than its 96 square miles might suggest. Perhaps less known by those who don't spend a lot of time on the island are its natural beauty, rare grassland habitats, and its conservation community and ethos. Today, we're going to be hearing more about all those things from our presenter, Mike Whittemore. Mike is the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts Cape and Islands Land Steward. A native of Framingham, Massachusetts, he has been working with TNC and living on island since early summer 2018. In his role, Mike implements conservation stewardship for TNC's preserves and conservation restrictions on the vineyard and on Cape Cod. He leads habitat restoration work and also oversees the Hoft Farm seasonal residents. He also manages volunteers, contractors, and seasonal staff. Mike is part of the Sandplain Grassland Network, which he'll be talking more about. He received his MS in Environmental Studies from Ohio University. And prior to joining the Nature Conservancy, Mike was employed by Woods Hole Research Center as a research assistant, where he studied the effects of ecological restoration on cranberry bogs and coordinated the completion of a guidebook for managing sandplain grasslands. Mike has also worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service in North Dakota, where he led native prairie adaptive management work. Some quick webinar housekeeping notes. Attendees are muted. Mike will present for about 20 minutes, and after that, we'll take your questions. Please share your questions via the Q&A function on your screen. If you have any problems with the presentation, please let us know via the chat function. We'll do everything we can to help. To get the best possible view of the presentation, we recommend that you go to the top center of your screen and choose, there's a pull-down menu there, choose Fit to Window. So with that, I am going to pass this off to Mike. Mike, welcome. Hello.
Thank you so much, James, for that introduction, and thank you all for joining. And wow, it's hard to believe it's already been 2 years in my role here. Time really flies. When I first learned I'd be working on Martha's Vineyard, I immediately thought of my time here as a teenager. Growing up in Massachusetts, my parents loved to take my siblings and I fishing off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. We used to go off of Squibnocket. If you had told us then that there were these pockets of native prairie on island reminiscent of parts of North Dakota or Northwest Ohio, I would have never believed you. 25 years later, with experience in Midwest grasslands, a conservation degree, and an opportunity now to preserve grasslands here, I'll forever see the island as much more than a tourist destination or fishing grounds. Nationwide, only 40% of grasslands remain. On Martha's Vineyard, we have sandplain grasslands, a specific type of coastal community that is globally rare, predominantly found on Long Island and the Massachusetts Islands. They are dominated by native grasses and wildflowers with few woody plants and found on dry, sandy, low-nutrient soils, typical of outwash plain. Outwash is sandy material deposited by glacier. Sandplain grasslands receive onshore winds and salt spray that delay the growth of woody plants, but favor salt-tolerant plants, and can have unique characteristics like frost bottoms that help regulate woody species. Frost bottoms are a topographical legacy left over from the glacier. There are depressions along the south shore that have varying frost points by depth, so that frost can occur later in the season, reducing woody growth during leaf out. They create an environment of pruning shrubs and trees when they're most vulnerable. Here's a picture of Tuckernuck Island where you can see the effects of onshore winds and salt spray on maintaining grasslands. This picture was taken with little management has occurred recently, only management done by the environment. Here, the shoreline is receding about 30 feet per year due to erosion. It's one of my favorite places to go. During the fall, I pay a guy $75 to take me over from Nantucket on his Boston Whaler so that I can check on our properties there. I'm always greeted by a mosaic of prairie plants and shorebirds, many of which are rare. So why are sandplain grasslands so important, and why has TNC invested so much time, money, and energy over the years to conserve them? First off, they're disappearing. Their biggest threats are development and encroachment of woody plants. As I mentioned before, they're also a globally rare ecosystem found predominantly on the Massachusetts Islands. According to a recent Cornell Lab of Ornithological study published in the Journal of Science, 29% of all birds in the US were lost in the past 50 years. That's nearly 1/3, with grassland birds being most affected. They also harbor a large proportion of rare and uncommon species in the region. On more than one occasion, I've heard a botanist or an ecologist point out a vibrant carpet of a single flower species in a sandplain grassland and say, "Mike, you'd be hard pressed to find that anywhere else in the state." That's just one testament to how important it is to conserve these systems, that although there are only a few of these grasslands left, these systems continue to be a source of resilience and a real stronghold for imperiled species. The picture above shows some of the rare and uncommon species typically found here. We need a full hour to talk about them all, but here are just a few, including New England blazing star, yellow thistle, grasshopper sparrow, frosted elfin, purple needlegrass, prairie lily, like I saw out in Ohio, Lion's Foot, just to name a few. Over the years, we've strategically procured land on Cape and the islands, mostly on Martha's Vineyard. In my position, I help manage 1,000 acres on Martha's Vineyard alone, with 650 in conservation restrictions here. A conservation restriction, or easement as other states call it, is the protection of land where we own the development rights and that the land is protected forever. Much of the land we manage here is sandplain grassland habitat. Nearly all sandplain grasslands need constant management, mostly due to encroachment of woody plants and invasive species. Invasive species are species that are not native and can outcompete and replace native plants. They tend to spread really rapidly, so we have to keep a constant eye on them. Here we're in the process of improving the land to increase biodiversity and habitat. In some cases, it doesn't take much, but in others, we have to virtually convert the whole system from a different land use, like agriculture, for example. To do this, we use a practice called ecological restoration. Restoration is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. Restoration takes many forms with many tools at our disposal, but above all, whatever we do on the ground is rooted in science. Recently, we put together a science-based approach that changes the way we look at management of these systems. In 2016, the Nature Conservancy formed the Sandplain Grassland Network, consisting of 9 scientists and land managers from Maine to New York. We launched a website last year. The goals are to share insights, collaborate with partners, tackle challenges, and write a guidebook for managing sandplain grasslands based on the state of research. It's the first time we've had all this information in one place. In 2017, I helped write the guidebook, which is based off of a literature review of scientific articles, something called gray literature like management plans, and interviews from leading professionals throughout the region. Since taking this job, the document has directly informed the evolution of our management here and abroad. Some key takeaways from the research are that what we did in the past wasn't quite working to contain woody species and to improve or increase biodiversity. The research also suggests increasing management techniques in combination and at a higher frequency depending on the management outcomes. Slide. Take last year's fall burn at Katama Airfield, for example. This is our highest quality grassland on the islands. Katama was the first site in New England where a prescribed fire was implemented when TNC began managing it in 1987. Since then, we burned every 4 to 5 years during spring, but colonial species like huckleberry continue to increase. To reach more of a grassland habitat, research told us to burn more frequently closer to summer. That's when we would have the best ecological effects. On Martha's Vineyard, we are unable to burn in summer, so we did the next best thing. We burned as soon as the burn window opened in the fall and burned sections never burned before that harbored invasive species. We expect a reduction in invasive species in woody plants and a higher frequency of native plants. If we had waited until later in the fall, woody species would have already begun storing their energy in their roots. Thus, burning wouldn't have had such an impact. We have also increased the frequency of burns from 4 to 5 years to 2 to 3 years. This work wouldn't have been possible without support of a grant. Another important component of management is ecological monitoring, which allows us to assess our management over time. Last year, we began implementing a consistent vegetation monitoring protocol in partnership with regional conservation organizations. The consistent approach will help us compare data with other sites in the region. Here's a photo of volunteers and the state botanist, Bob Warnerall, looking for an endangered plant last year. Another example of improvements in our management is long-term restoration project on private land where we hold a conservation restriction. This site would have been a golf course had the landowner not purchased the property and worked with us to put a conservation restriction on it to protect it forever. Much of this land was previously forested, with a patch of sandplain grassland left over from agriculture. The general goals here are to convert the land to a biologically diverse mosaic of sandplain grassland and oak pine savanna. Last May, we applied a late spring burn. It was my very first burn, which was really exciting. In restoration, timing is everything. We've never burned here so close to summer. By burning during spring, we can control cool season grasses and invasive species. As you can see, the results were great. Management units are designed to provide refuge for plants and animals during burns, so we never burn an entire site all at once. This work wouldn't have been possible without support from a stewardship endowment dedicated to this site. After years of burning, it was really exciting to hear from the burn boss who's burned this property for years that we're really transitioning from a restoration to a maintenance regime. At that point, when the site is dominated by warm season grasses and wildflowers, we'll likely add fall burns to our burn plan. By then, most non-native cool season grasses will be gone, and we can focus then on favoring the fire-adapted species even more. At the same site, we also made headway to expand the oak savanna surrounding the grassland during this winter. I worked with a contractor to remove 250 pitch pines, but left oaks and the best pitch pines that were available. Although pitch pines are native, they form a monoculture in some areas on this site, likely from a legacy of agriculture. And the added shade and pine needle duff can negatively impact seed soil contact and bare mineral soil. Contractors were surgical. It's really difficult to use heavy equipment to remove large pines without damaging the oaks beneath, but they did a fantastic job. We also removed all wood chips as they add carbon to the soil and also disfavor seed to soil contact as well. We'll rely on the existing seed bank and added light for growth of native grasses and wildflowers in the future. Based on its proximity to the ocean, this is one of those projects where you just can't wait to get back to see what comes up after years of suppression. This work couldn't have been done without support from a stewardship endowment dedicated to this site. And if you look at the bottom picture, you can see off to the left, that's a site where we didn't selectively cut any pitch pines out. And off to the right is where we did. And as you can see, there's a lot more open area for grasses and wildflowers to grow beneath. And some pitch pines were left as well. Another project we're working on is the Woods Preserve, Grassland and Savanna Restoration. Prior to my arrival, we removed dead trees left over from an insect outbreak that occurred in 2004 to expand the grassland savanna. Woods Preserve is the largest unbroken tract of land on Martha's Vineyard. It consists of mostly glacial moraine with some sandplain outwash. Here, we use fire and mowing to maintain grassland, scrub oak, and tree oak savanna. Scrub oak is a host tree for rare insects, and many trees that you see in the background are actually post oak, which is on the watch list for Massachusetts for being so uncommon. Last year, we procured this tractor with a 12-foot mower, which has made work much, much more efficient by mowing 3 times as much in the same period of time. In 2007, we saved Heron Creek Farm from being developed into a housing lot. Since then, we've used part of it, Bamford Preserve, as pictured, to study best management practices for restoring agriculture to sandplain grasslands. We did that research in partnership with the Marine Biological Lab, and they did a great job. Based off of that research, 2 scientific papers were published in the Journal of Restoration Ecology. Some of that work directly informed management on site as well. Restoration is really an art and a science, often with many well-timed steps. I'm certainly still learning and have a long way to go. Our annual process right now at Bamford Preserve is to first harvest the little blue stem seed in late October. We then store it and clean it. We clean the thatch out of it all winter. Thereafter, we till twice. because research told us that tilling twice helps by exposing mineral soil and breaking roots up and creating a seed bed for the little blue stem seed. And then we plant in May. We plant in May to take advantage of spring showers for natural irrigation. All of these steps couldn't be done without volunteers, especially those from Sierra Club members, some of which are pictured in the top left photo. They visit in the spring and fall each year. Volunteers are an important pillar to the work we do here. Last year, we created a group in partnership with other island conservation organizations to highlight our work, but also to recruit island-centered volunteers. This work couldn't have been done without support from a stewardship endowment specific to the site. If you look at the bottom photo, it was taken a few weeks ago after tilling and planting 13 acres with approximately 160 pounds of little blue stem. Prior to planting, we were able to examine a subsample of seed to estimate the germination rate based on morphological characteristics. The seed looked good this year, and I think we expect really good results. Here are some pictures of results from last year. The top picture shows what an unrestored agricultural field looks like, pictured to the left, compared to a restored patch, right? And when I say restored, it's really the first phase of restoration is to plant little blue stem. So no wildflowers much yet. As you can see, some wildflowers are popping up naturally up on the right that had never been there, including butterfly weed, which is a species of concern in Massachusetts. The bottom picture shows a close-up of the little blue stem that was harvested from island sources and planted over the years. TNC probably has the only seed harvester on island, and we harvested only seed from island grasslands to keep with Martha's Vineyard genetic stock. It would be much easier and probably cheaper to order seed grown from Long Island, but we don't do that. The next step is to focus on planting native wildflowers once the rest of the field is dominated by little blue stem. When we eventually burn the site, we expect it to really come together. This winter, we're also fortunate to be awarded a $28,000 grant as part of the Mass Wildlife Habitat program to improve sandplain habitat in the Catema Plains. This is exciting because, to my knowledge, we had never been awarded this grant on Martha's Vineyard. We partnered with the town of Edgartown to expand 7 acres of town land to grassland from young forest. In aerial photos taken in the 30s, nearly all of Catema Plains was dominated by grassland, and slowly it has become more and more scrubby and forested with the lack of management. For this project, we removed a hedgerow that separated 2 big grasslands. We brush cut 190 acres of sporadic saplings on Catema airfields, where shrubs grew too tall to manage with our equipment. To the right of the road, in the bottom picture, trees and shrubs were removed to restore open habitat as it was 30 years ago and beyond. In Catema Plains, there are numerous entities that own 500 acres of contiguous grasslands. So partnerships like this are really crucial to getting things done to scale. In 2018, the trustees partnered with us on another project in Catema Plains where we received another Mass Wildlife grant. With that funding, we eliminated a hedgerow of trees, shrubs that separated the airfield from the Farm Institute. Now, 2 of the largest contiguous grasslands on Martha's Vineyard are less fragmented. Since then, the trustees found 2 grassland sparrows in their fields, a threatened species in Massachusetts. So we hope that habitat improvements like this will bring species like the grasshopper sparrow back to nest like they used to. The work we do on Martha's Vineyard has never been so important. With the Sandplain Grassland Network, better equipment, increased partnerships, creative funding opportunities, and more volunteers, we're positioned for success on the islands. Our work is also helping others manage grasslands regionally. Although we are fortunate to have a lot of conservation on the island, TNC is dedicated to science-based restoration for the purpose of making this island more resilient. Without the support of our donors, volunteers, conservation partners, and the hard work of our predecessors over the years, we could never accomplish what we do. And for that, we're really thankful. Personally, it's a wonderful feeling knowing that in some small way, I'm helping to leave a good mark on land that I enjoyed as a kid. Before we turn it over to questions, I wanted to leave you with one last picture I took yesterday while visiting Katama Airfield. Does anybody know what this is? It's a sandhill crane. What's notable about this species is that it only is seen on the Vineyard a handful of times since 2005. It's a spring vagrant, or in other words, it's found its way here either by accident or by way of a storm. It's way off course, and although they are increasing here, one thing's for sure, this bird would probably not have landed here had it been a second growth forest, a parking lot, or a housing development. Thank you.
Mike, thank you so much. I love the photo. What a great way to wrap up your presentation. And everyone, remember, please add your questions to the Q&A function on the screen. We definitely want to hear from you. So Mike, just to start off, one question about the sandplain grasslands and kind of their how rare they are, and I guess just wondering whether you can say a little bit more about that, and also, are there any good examples of sandplain grasslands on Cape Cod?
Yeah, well, sandplain grasslands are really a globally rare and imperiled ecosystem. They're predominantly found only on Long Island and the Massachusetts Islands, and however, there are pockets of them on Cape Cod, all the way up to Kennebunkport, Maine, where there are a couple of grasslands up there as well, and a few scattered between. But really, the lion's share exists, here in the Massachusetts Islands and Long Island. As for Cape Cod, there is actually a really great success story over there with the Crane Wildlife Management area that was restored. Much of it was from forest, and I think it had expanded from an airport at one time, or a pocket of sandplain grassland, but it's a really large sandplain grassland. And since then, many grasshopper sparrows and other rare species have come back, which is excellent.
Great, thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about the role of Hoft Farm on the island, and kind of what role does it play for the conservation community there?
Yeah, well, I'm a little biased in saying this, but it's a really important place because I'm housed there, and it helps house me. It houses our equipment, like our tractor and our other equipment. 92 acres, beautiful trails, and that's one important aspect of Hoft Farm because, as I mentioned before, a lot of the land that we have procured here on Martha's Vineyard over the years has, been, has to do with ecology, but the Hoft Farm gives us a chance to provide trails and connect people to nature in a different aspect. But for the whole general conservation community also, we house our volunteers here, incoming scientists, and I think most importantly, we provide housing for a lot of other conservation organizations on islands, and at a subsidized rate. As you might know, Martha's Vineyard isn't very cheap to find housing, if you can find housing. There's only so many houses. So we provide that we partner with conservation organizations, and these interns come here and live with me for 3 months out of the years. And just one last thing about that, if you go around to different conservation organizations on island today, some of the higher ups, you talk to them, and some of them have actually started here at Hoft Farm as an intern. And so it's had a great impact.
That's very cool. Great to know. You mentioned, Mike, volunteers. Could you talk a little bit more about the role of volunteers on the island and your work with them?
Sure. Well, for my position, it's just me on the island. So as I mentioned before, I help manage Cape Cod and the Massachusetts Islands. So there's a lot of work here for only one person, and we could not do what we do without the support of volunteers. One of a good success stories over the past 20 years, we've partnered with the Sierra Club who a group of 10 to 13, usually retirees, comes for a week from all over the country. They live with me for a week in the spring and also in the fall. And they'll cook meals and they'll present about their work in the community and that kind of thing. It's a great atmosphere. And then each day we go out and do restoration work on lands that we own or manage. So that's just one example. We also have put together this, group in partnership with conservation organizations on island, where we can really start to recruit island volunteers and bring some folks up from the island to get experience, but also to help us as well.
Related question from one of our attendees today. How does one volunteer?
That's a good question. You can just email me. We can follow up with an email, my email, and shoot me an email. And we have so many different pieces of work to work on to give you the opportunity to gain experience or to help in many ways.
Great. And this is probably a good time to just say that we will be sending a follow-up thank you a few days after the webinar, and we'll include that information as well as other resources that are touched upon during the presentation and the Q&A. So, Mike, do you ever expect to not have to manage sandplain grasslands?
Good question. These are systems that do need constant management. And as I mentioned in the very first photo, or the second photo of the slide, some grasslands that exist so close to the ocean and experience such strong onshore winds and salt spray and other effects from the ocean don't need to be managed nearly as much. But if you leave them alone for long enough, they will start to develop into more of a forest. So yes, I think that management at different stages will always occur. Yes.
And Mike, you might have said this, and the questioner missed it. But how much of the island is currently in sandplain grasslands?
We have mapped that. Actually, we mapped that in 2005, I believe, and do have that number. I would have to get back to you on that, but really it's a very small percentage of the island. And most importantly, the question we should be asking is, how much land has the opportunity to be restored back into sandplain grasslands? And I think the answer to that question is certainly a lot more than there is grassland right now. Because if you look at Martha's Vineyard is really divided up into the moraine and then outwash to the south. And there's a very large area of outwash to the south that has the potential for more grassland.
Sheep. Would you go back to the sheep that were on the island? Are there still sheep grazing there?
There are farms I think there's almost 50 working farms on Martha's Vineyard, and sheep is one of the 4 management tools considered for managing sandplain grasslands. As I tell people, one size doesn't fit all, and sheep grazing works in some areas, especially where there's already an established farm and there's already the logistics are set up. But there are also 3 other tools like vegetation control or vegetation mechanical management, like mowing is very important. And then also fire as well. And so we're really learning more. We're looking at the research and realizing that the more you can use management in combination, sometimes the better off it will be. So mowing with fire at certain times a year at certain different intervals could really be helpful as well.
Were there political issues as well as fundraising issues in being able to control land use where the alternative was residential subdivision?
It's a good question. My job, although it's very broad, I'm also very focused on just the restoration and the groundwork aspect. So we'd have to get back to you on that. It's a great question, though. I'd be interested to know.
Let's see. Got a lot of great questions. Thanks, everyone. Mike, let's see. What is the best thing to plant in a back garden in town after removing all the aggressive non-native trees and plants?
First of all, what you plant in your garden or your backyard really depends on the type of soils you have and the type of shade you have back there. So all those conditions you'll have to look into. But to give you a short answer, really, the more native plants you can plant, especially for pollinator species, probably the better. And we like to, we're big on biodiversity. So the more biodiversity you can add, also the better as well.
Like, just going back for a second to the grassland restoration theme, is it true that much of the grassland restoration is on land that was once farmland, land that used to be forest? Are there any plans to do reforestation?
We do not have any plans to reforest. Much of the island is forested, reforested. And much of the state has reforested. It's one of the best ecological stories in American history is the rate at which land has reforested after deforestation. But here on Martha's Vineyard, we're focused on, in our land, we're really focused on restoring to what was sandplain grassland, because sandplain grassland is one. There might be more, but really there are two main hotspots in Massachusetts that harbor such rare and imperiled species, such biodiversity, and sandplain grasslands are one of them. So we're really focused on just restoring the land that we have to more of a sandplain grassland habitat.
Great, thank you. What projected vegetation changes might climate change bring to the grasslands?
It's a good question. I know a lot of scientists are looking at this right now. As you know, it's only going to get warmer. And so species that are down south of us, like on Long Island, that are in grasslands down there, that aren't found on, Massachusetts islands, we're thinking about assisted migration at some point. Because, as it gets warmer, what could happen is it might get too warm for those species and they have nowhere to go. They can't jump over all that water at such a quick rate. So we might incorporate assisted migration there.
Okay. Let's see. I have a couple of questions, Mike, about ticks. Are ticks a problem on the island?
Yeah, they're definitely a problem. This is one of the hot spots in America, actually, just the Northeast. I know Wisconsin has really big populations of ticks as well out there, but it's certainly a problem. Plus, we live on an island out here. So yes, to your answer.
Related question regarding deer, and again, a couple of questions. Is there a problem with deer eating native plants, and how do we work to manage that?
Yeah, deer. So, what was the question again? Sorry.
Is there a problem with deer eating native plants, and how do we control that grazing?
Yeah, deer, like humans, they like plants, and there are a lot of deer on the island, and that's really helping increase the population of ticks. Deer are a major vector for ticks. So the way we look at that is, if we see that deer are a really major problem in a preserve that we manage, we would consult, for example, the deer biologist from Massachusetts. I just got finished doing this. We look at the population, we do studies on it. And there were some studies that the whole island did, and they were able to generate heat maps of the populations of deer. So we would go out then and do a deer browse study, for example, and we found that of all the species that deer prefer, they were eating stuff that they didn't even like in some of these areas, which gave us an indication of what their population was. And in one area, I think it was 100 deer per square mile. So a lot of deer, that's way over the the average of what it should be. So at that point, we incorporate hunting if it makes sense, especially in areas where we have a lot of, rare species and that kind of thing. Like I said, deer, for some reason, they like rare species just as much too. They go right after those pretty species.
Good. Mike, you've talked a fair amount about restoring vegetation. Is there any possibility of restoring some of the populations, and I apologize in advance if I garble this pronunciation, but any of the populations of threatened or endangered Lepidoptera species?
Yeah, so you're talking about moths, I think silk moths. What we're focused on right now is managing for the structure and composition of grasslands to improve those as much as possible, because we believe that if you build it, they will come. And that has happened time and time again over the years. We've seen wildlife come back to areas that have been degraded, and then after we restore them, they return. So I think you build them and they will come, and yeah.
Kind of continuing on that theme, and I'm going to need to read this question somewhat specifically. The heath hen was a distinctive subspecies of greater prairie chicken that became extinct in 1932. The last population of this subspecies lived on Martha's Vineyard, suggesting that the island's grassland habitats are well suited for the heath hen. Has anyone considered restoring the ecological role of heath hens on the vineyard by introducing the closely related greater prairie chicken?
Great question. I wish I was at the level where I can make those cool decisions, but I'm not. But I can answer the question. This has happened before. If you look at just the wild turkey, for example, it was a great American story. They were on the brink of extinction, and I think back in the 50s or 60s they were restored. They were spread throughout the country, and then of course at the same time you had forestation happening as well, that forest regenerating, so it really helped them, and hunting regulations as well. So this has happened before, it's worked before, there's been great stories. The Nature Conservancy also has a lot of experience in this out in the Great Plains area. And I think that anytime you bring a threatened species to a habitat you think could thrive, especially when that species is so related to one that is so similar and so related to one that has gone extinct, I think that's a great story. However, I will say there have been other stories like smallmouth bass and largemouth bass. Many might know that they're actually not native to this area. And, without doing your homework, in some areas they have already really outcompeted some brook trout, native species, and that kind of thing. So I think if we were to do something like this, as the Nature Conservancy, science-based organization, we would definitely put in the work to do good pilot studies before we implemented that.
Thank you, Mike. So we're getting close to the end of our time here. So got a couple more questions, and then probably have to wrap it up. Mike, how has burning happened in the time before development?
There's been research about this, and so it has always been sort of understood that Native Americans burned a lot, and recent research came out to sort of contradict that a little bit. But lightning strikes. I think that if you look around, the species on Martha's Vineyard with sandplain grassland species, these are fire adapted species, so fire had to have occurred here at some point. It's unclear about the interval, but regardless of what happened in the past, there's been about 50 years of research on fire research, a lot of it out here on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, years of research, basically saying that fire is a really great tool for restoration for many reasons. It could take away the duff layer where there's more seed soil contact, and the duff layer is just basically decomposed material from woody species over time. It also helps with seed scarification. Other tools don't really do that like fire can. Grazing and mowing can't really do that. So there are a lot of really, really positive effects. Plus, the species in sandplain grasslands happen to be fire adapted as well, so they respond generally really well to fire.
Great, thank you, Mike. Go into a little bit more of a non-work question. Do you have a favorite TNC spot on the island?
Yeah, I would say the Francis Newell Woods Preserve, which, as I mentioned, is the largest unbroken tract of land on Martha's Vineyard. And it's a piece of land where we manage some of it to sandplain grasslands, but by and large, most of it we just let grow. And a lot of it's forested on the moraine. So you can stand out in the middle of this savanna, this grassland, and look around and not see any eyesores or any houses or hear any noises. And to be on a relatively small island and have an area like that still is pretty special. So I always enjoy working there.
And when you're there, what kind of work are you doing?
Mm-hmm. Mostly what I'm doing at the Woods Preserve is either checking on the property. So we do property monitoring at least once a year, where we're just making sure, people aren't vandalizing the property or, encroaching or building a house on our property kind of thing. But mostly I go out there to manage the land for sandplain grasslands and to make sure the gates are working and that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mike, we are about out of time. Before we wrap it up, is there anything that you would like to add?
I just want to restate how thankful we are for all the support of our volunteers. I know some of you are on the call, our donors, our predecessors for putting so much work into these properties, and everybody else watching. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, and just to echo that to everyone who's attending today, thank you so much. I mean, your support and engagement with TNC is absolutely critical to everything that we do. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. And again, thanks everyone for being here. Please consider joining us for another Nature Connects webinar. You can find out about upcoming webinars as well as get recordings of prior webinars at www.nature.org/MA-webinars. And we'll also send that information in the follow-up thank you. And don't forget, if you do enjoy these webinars, please invite your friends. We love to have this opportunity to talk and hear from people. So with that, I'm going to sign us off for today. Thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Be well. Bye.